The movie 300 showed King Leonidas's epic last stand, but the filmmakers didn't dare show what Xerxes did to the Spartan king's body after his defeat. In 480 BCE, a battle took place that would etch itself into the fabric of history through the sheer impossible odds that were overcome. However, the journey to that battle began over a decade earlier, when the ruler of Persia, Darius I, invaded Greece, and this King of Kings had the forces to back it up. Back during Darius I's initial invasion, he brought an overwhelming army on ground and sea to invade and conquer Greece. However, even with his fleet of 600 warships and almost 28,000 warriors, he was ultimately unsuccessful. The ancient Greeks were a tough nut to crack, and they weren't going to bend the knee easily, but despite the failed invasion, the Persians never forgot about those Greeks. After Darius I's first parish, his son Xerxes I decided to avenge him by doing what he never could, conquering the Greeks. In 480 BCE, he mounted his invasion, crossing the Strait of Gallipoli and heading to Thessaly. In these early days, many cities surrendered to Persian rule. Even as it began, Xerxes' invasion proved to be much more of a threat than his father's. The biggest difference was the manpower he had brought, with even conservative modern estimates at around 100,000 men and close to 1,200 warships. A force like that had scarcely been seen in history. Many opposing armies either ran or gave themselves up, but if anything, this just made Xerxes overconfident. It wouldn't always be so easy. With the Persian army marching unchecked through Europe, it wasn't until further into the battle that they actually met resistance. The Battle of Thermopylae would go down in history as the first military engagement of the invasion, and to say it started with a bang would be an understatement. Over the years, history has slightly exaggerated the size of the Persian army for dramatic effect. For a long time, sources claimed that Persia marched up the Battle of Thermopylae with up to 3 million warriors. While still imposing, the truth was much more realistic. 3 million men simply was not in the realm of possibility in 5th century BC, but the ratio between the Persians and the Greeks was still staggering. Today's highest estimates suggest Persia marched with 300,000 men, eventually meeting just 7,000 Greeks at Thermopylae. With the setting established, let's meet some of the major players. Even before the first Persian invasion of Greece, the two civilizations had found themselves at odds during the reign of Darius I. Between 499 BCE and 494 BCE, the Ionian revolt rose against the Persian Empire. Darius crushed the rebellion, and he didn't fail to notice that the Greek city-states had supported the Ionian rebels. A year into Darius's initial campaign, he sent messengers to every city-state in Greece asking for their surrender. Through his messengers, Darius demanded gifts of earth and water as symbols of submission. After Darius sent messengers to demand gifts of surrender from Greece's city-states, most cities obliged and paid homage. Two of the most powerful city-states, Athens and Sparta, however, refused. Athens put Darius's messengers to trial and had them executed. That was better than what the Spartans did. They threw the messengers down well. 10 years later, Darius's son was ready to repay them for everything. After large-scale invasion doesn't just happen overnight, it takes time to gather the necessary resources and soldiers. After 4 years of preparation, Xerxes had arranged everything to begin his campaign in 481 BCE. But it wasn't going to be easy. For instance, everyone knew the route that Xerxes was going to have to take, and the Greeks knew how to use that to their advantage. One of Xerxes' army's main objectives was to capture Athens, to which end the Persian army made for the region of Attica. This route, however, would take them through a mountain pass along the coast of Thermopylae. Xerxes formulated this entire plan, relying on his already formidable strategic skills, but the Greeks were planning too. Growing up, Xerxes developed the necessary skills for a man of his standing. Beginning at 7 years old, he trained to ride horses and hunt. However, he didn't solely rely on physical training. In all his training, Xerxes wasn't only learning to be a ruthless and skillful warrior. By the time he turned 14, he had begun his education on being a proper prince with the values of bravery, justice, prudence, and wisdom. Being a proper Persian ruler required the know-how to oversee the military. As such, part of the customary training for Persian princes was to serve in their army for 25 years, gaining all the strategic and combat experience that comes with it. By most accounts, Xerxes Thurs was a ruthless king, striking down any who dared to challenge him. In 2 years following his ascension to the throne, several revolts rose up in Egypt and Babylon, all of which Xerxes quickly and ruthlessly stamped out. When the Persian Empire began its invasion, many Greek city-states banded together to oppose them. Although they formed an army, they still needed someone to lead them. The Greek coalition chose Leonidas I, king of Sparta, for this task. Like Xerxes, Leonidas was more than just one thing. Though many praised Leonidas for his military and tactical abilities, he wasn't only a successful warrior. Being Sparta's king, he was also skilled when it came to the less glamorous political side of ruling. Spartan society was rough, creating warriors from birth with a focus on strength and survival of the fittest. Throughout his life, Leonidas proved superior in every valued Spartan trait, from strength to wisdom. He wasn't just a nepo baby. He could back it up. That being said, he did come from an exceptional family. Before Leonidas became immortalized in legend, he already had ties to the legendary heroes of ancient Greece. He was born of the Aegea dynasty, one of Sparta's 2 royal houses, and a family that claimed the demigod Heracles as their ancestor. Beyond that, even his name was enough to strike fear in his enemies. Leonidas Thurs, king of Sparta. Many of the greatest historical leaders carried intentional names fitting for their positions. Leonidas' name came from Leon of Sparta, his grandfather, with the name literally meaning descendant of Leon. However, his name has another translation: son of a lion. As fierce as Leonidas was, the warriors under him were just as formidable. Spartan hoplite were citizens chosen to be warriors, training their entire lives to be an elite fighting force. Usually furnished with spears, shields, and bronze armor, they were Sparta's first line of defense. However, this was only one of Greece's city-states, albeit a significant one. Although there were hundreds of city-states within ancient Greece, 2 stood above the rest: Athens and Sparta. But while all the different cities generally handled most things separately, and in fact fought each other more often than not, this changed when facing a substantial threat. That's when Athens and Sparta took their place at the top of the heap usually. Regarding land and resources, the Greek city-states mostly concerned themselves with their own well-being. However, whenever a severe outside threat appeared, the city-states usually didn't hesitate to join and oppose it. They were rivals, but they were all still Greeks. Among the city-states, Sparta inevitably carved out its place and defended it. Through conflicts like the Second Macedonian War, they displayed their might and made themselves known throughout Greece as an outstanding force. It wasn't long until the rest of the world knew it too. As Sparta grew into its own, it achieved renown throughout the Western world. By 500 BCE, its economic might and unparalleled land-fighting force had given Sparta the reputation of a people not to be underestimated. As Xerxes and his army marched closer to Thermopylae, Sparta found itself in a bind. It was August, and they were celebrating Carnia, a festival where the Spartans forbade all military action. Also, the Olympic Games were underway, and the truths kept Sparta from sending off its military, at least not all of it. Knowing that the Persian army was approaching and needed someone to send them packing, Sparta sent a relatively small contingent of men rather than their whole army. Ready for battle, a mass of Spartans, including 300 royal guards, went to halt the march of Xerxes' army. The destination where Sparta's army was set to meet the Persian forces was a crucial point in Xerxes's campaign. Thermopylae, translated as Hot Gates, was the pass north of Sparta that served as a major access point to the rest of Greece. Contrary to popular belief, as the Spartan army matched with Thermopylae, they did not remain alone. Along the way, other Greek allies offered forces of various sizes to join the defense. City-states like Debes, Corinth, and Thespia each gave several hundred men to the cause. At the helm of the Greek allies was the mighty King Leonidas, but he didn't just call the shots from afar. He marched right at the head of the army as it grew, leading by example. Once the Spartans and Persian armies reached Thermopylae, Xerxes extended his form of an olive branch. He sent a messenger with an offer for the Greeks to ally with Persia, and gave up their lands. When Leonidas refused, Xerxes commanded the Greek allies to lay down their weapons and surrender completely. Rather than surrender and simply stand by as the Persian army continued into Greece, Leonidas made his opposition clear. When told to lay down their arms, the Spartan king sent Xerxes's messenger back with a response, saying, "Molon labe," which roughly translates to "come and take them." Due to overconfidence, fear, or some form of mercy, Xerxes delayed his initial attack. For 4 days the Persian army stood by, unsure of the Greek allies' numbers, and hoping they would just leave. Although Xerxes waited for days, expecting the Greek allies to heed his demands or surrender, or at the very least pack up and leave, he was also waiting on his own people. The Persian fleet was supposed to meet them at the coast, but was delayed and damaged by bad weather. Xerxes was a patient invader, but even he had his limits. After feeling he had waited long enough, the Persian army advanced on the 5th day, but battles were new to the Greek allies, and they knew what to do. While the Persian army was content with striking down any in their path, the Greek allies took a more reserved approach. Knowing Xerxes' superior numbers, Leonidas had his army maintain their defense above all else to outlast Persia's forces and wear them out. Spartan combat largely relied on defense, especially through their phalanx formation. This faithful technique involved the man forming a wall of overlapping shields and striking from behind with their swords and spears. While it was necessary for Xerxes's plans to take the pass at Thermopylae, it also gave the Greek allies a distinct advantage. Nestled between the cliffs and the sea, Leonidas specifically marched his army to the narrowest point to bottleneck the Persian army, rendering the advantage of Xerxes's numbers inert. People often bring up one famous quote concerning the Battle of Thermopylae. After debated who said the quote, it came up when a Greek soldier lamented that the Persian army's arrows would block out the sun. Reports vary, but either Leonidas or a man named Dinakes replied, "Own to be nice then, to fight in the shade." Xerxes sent in his infantry following his ranged attack, but it didn't go as planned. 10,000 Persian foot soldiers charged the Greek army, but made it no further. The phalanx formation withstood the assault, and the allies looted many of Xerxes's warriors. Leonidas's army succeeded in outlasting the Persian forces, but they still suffered losses. During the first attack, where the Greek allies drove back 10,000 Persian soldiers, the allies lost as many as 3 men. Throughout all of this, the allies also maintained efficiency and practicality. The Spartans were in top physical form and constantly trained to maintain it, but they were still human. Leonidas accounted for the basic weakness of exhaustion and regularly substituted men on the front line with fresh ones to combat it. Having failed his first attacks, Xerxes brought out his heavy hitters. Against the reinforced lines of the allies, 10,000 of Persia's elite warriors, called the Immortals, charged. However, just like the first 10,000, the allies stopped them in their tracks and sent them running back. On the second day, Xerxes continued to pressure the allied forces. Unsure what else to do, he threw waves of Persian warriors against the wall of Ophrya's shields, causing little more than a dent in Leonidas' forces. For all the strategy and might that Leonidas commanded, he overestimated at least one man's loyalty. On that same day, a Greek man named Ephialtes went to Xerxes and traded his country for money and other gifts. He informed the Persian army of a secret path behind the Allied lines. Having been directed to the Anope path, Xerxes sent what remained of his elite warriors to outflank the Greek allies. Taking the secret mountain path, they emerged on the other side of Leonidas' force, gaining an enormous advantage. This monstrous betrayal would reverberate throughout the ages. With the names of Leonidas and Xerxes, the traitor Ephialtes also became known throughout history. Today, the Greek word for nightmare Ephialtes is derived from his name. Leonidas was well aware of the Anope path and had stationed 1,000 men at the path's entrance. However, once the Persian forces marched through the passage on the third day of battle, Leonidas' warriors were no match for them and fled. Luckily, Leonidas learned of the betrayal and the Persian army's approach before they closed in. He was fully aware of the consequences if Xerxes was allowed to plow through the path. Using the time they had, he called the council to decide their next move. Rather than run away or order his entire army to meet their end, Leonidas decided on something in the middle. Knowing their fate, he gave most of the Greek allies a choice: stay with him and perish, or run and live to fight another day. Leonidas was adamant about making a stand, so he remained at the front with his 300 Spartan royal guards. Of the minority who stayed with the Spartans were the 900 Helots, a class of subjugated non-Spartan warriors, 400 Thebans, and 700 Thespians who refused to leave, despite them, consisting of Thespia's entire hoplite force. Finally, the last battle erupted. Meeting their end with open arms and ferocious cries, the remaining Greek allies charged at the Persian army on their doorstep. Their goal was no longer to win, but to slay as many enemies as possible. Like always, the Spartan king led his men against the invaders, remaining right at the front and in the thick of it. At last, during this unforeseen attack, Leonidas I was slain by Xerxes' forces. Although Leonidas marched to what he aimed to be victory, he learned of the alternative from a mystical source. Sometime before the battle, Sparta went to the Oracle of Delphi for guidance in the coming conflict. The oracle prophesied that for Sparta to survive, its king would have to perish in its place. Amid this climactic battle, not everyone maintained the same warrior spirit as the Spartans. Rather than perish at the hands of the Persian army, the remaining Thebans surrendered to the invaders, either being captured or slain anyway. Although the Thebans had tried to submit themselves to Xerxes, the Spartans and the rest of the allies held fast. They resolved to fight to the very last man, and despite their small number, these courageous warriors were not to be underestimated. The Spartans fought tooth and nail as they had nothing more to lose, except their country should they surrender. According to historians, they fought until their swords and spears broke, then resorted to biting and clawing their enemies. The Spartans and their allies fought until their numbers dwindled down next to nothing, at which point Xerxes' forces only needed to finish the job. The Persian army positioned themselves at all sides of the allies and readied their bows. Refusing to stop fighting, even at the end, the surviving Greek allies met their maker. The surrounding Persian warriors drew their arrows and fired, slaying every last Spartan Helot and Thespian left. With that, the battle concluded. Having outflanked Greece's ally defense and sent most of their forces retreating, the Battle of Thermopylae came to a close. Xerxes stood victorious above the fallen Spartans and their king. For Xerxes, winning the battle seemingly wasn't enough, and he had to humiliate Leonidas. Sifting through the battle's wreckage, his men found the slain Spartan king and decapitated him before crucifying his body. This was a grave, sacrilegious insult. Xerxes and his army had achieved victory over Greece's primary defense, but this didn't have the effect they had hoped for. Throughout the rest of Greece, news of Spartacus' stand and sacrifice spread, and gave the other city-states the push they needed. In the wake of Persians' victory at Thermopylae, Xerxes moved further into Greece, sacking Plataea, Thessalia, and eventually Athens. This wasn't for long, as the Greek resistance started to achieve more and more victories through their infantry and navy. Seizing control over much of Greece and razing Athens to the ground, Xerxes pushed the Greek allies to the point of no return. Reflecting on Thermopylae, Xerxes knew a land battle would be unwise against the now desperate Greek allies. He had outflanked them with his navy, but was suddenly beaten by the Athenians at Salamis. This led like dominoes to Xerxes and his forces abandoning their conquest entirely. Victory was made, but few people realized how close it was to turning out differently. Although they would have lost either way, Leonidas's choice to stand against Xerxes and allow his comrades to escape meant everything. Had he ordered a full retreat, the borrowed forces of Sparta's allies would have all been diminished, breaking Greece's morale in the process. If that happened, there's no telling where Xerxes' ruthlessness would have ended. As suggested by historians, if Greece had allowed Xerxes to continue unchecked, he likely would have burned everything down. As evidenced by his actions toward Athens and even toward the deceased Leonidas, Xerxes had no qualms about destroying those who defied him. It's important to remember that many of Greece's most significant contributions to the world were either not around before the invasion or just barely survived it. If Xerxes had ultimately succeeded, it likely would have erased much of ancient Greece's historical impact, such as the works of its famous philosophers and even the Olympic Games. The Battle of Thermopylae and the United Sacrifice inspired many things like hero cults and legends, with the more modern example being the comic book series at 300. This would eventually become the 2006 film of the same name, which, while portraying a truly epic battle, is riddled with inaccuracies and embellishments. Thanks for watching History Expo Z. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page Factornate for more incredible facts about everything.